Even her kids are fake produce, it turns out.
Well,
Well, we don't know
looks
that.
like they could be.
There's something unsettling about how a carefully constructed narrative can start to crumble the moment a few inconvenient facts slip into the open. That's exactly the sensation people had when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry presented their son, Archie, to the world, or tried to. For months, admirers saw only glimpses that seemed perfectly orchestrated. Polished photos of Meghan's pregnancy, affectionate appearances, a sense that this was a couple determined to redefine royal life on their own terms. But away from the cameras, the reality was far more complicated.
Fabricate a story and then change it and lie that she's in labor when Archie's already been born for several hours.
On May 6, 2019, Buckingham Palace released what seemed like a standard bulletin. The Duchess had gone into labor, Harry was with her, and all was proceeding as expected. Side, journalists prepared for the customary press calls and images. A few hours later, a second statement declared that Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor had been safely delivered. But the sequence of events didn't quite line up. The notice announcing Meghan was in labor was issued shortly after 2 p.m., yet official records later confirmed the baby had actually been born before sunrise, just after 5 in the morning. It was as if the story had tripped over itself before it even began. At the time, most people shrugged this off as a glitch in communication. Perhaps it was nothing more than a delay in getting the details to the press. That's what the palace insisted when they chalked it up to a minor logistical hiccup. Still, in a household known for precise routines and time-honored processes, any inconsistency, however trivial, tends to grow into something bigger. And for a couple already known for breaking royal norms, this small discrepancy was all it took to spark suspicion. When the birth certificate emerged 10 days later, it confirmed that Archie had arrived at the Portland Hospital, a private facility renowned for its discreet handling of high-profile patients. But by then, questions had already started to stack up. The first announcements hadn't included any mention of the hospital. No one saw Meghan entering or leaving the building. There were no public glimpses of the couple carrying their baby to a waiting car. None of the familiar rituals played out. Compare that to Princess Diana proudly stepping onto the Lindo wing steps with William in her arms, or Kate presenting each of her children to the cameras outside the same entrance. Those moments cemented continuity. They were reassuring to a nation that looks to tradition for validation. Harry and Meghan, however, opted out of that script entirely, and they were perfectly within their rights to do so. But in the empty space they left behind, doubts took root. People didn't just want to glimpse the baby. They wanted confirmation that everything had unfolded exactly as expected, that the centuries-old ceremonies hadn't been brushed aside without a word, that this modern story still honored the customs that came before. Veteran royal correspondents were among the first to express unease. They'd spent years documenting royal births and noticed how tightly the Sussexes held the reins. Even Archie's debut photograph was arranged far from the press, inside Windsor Castle behind closed doors. Harry held the newborn, Meghan at his side, smiling gently. Picture was tender, but something about it felt incomplete. And when an audience senses there's a missing puzzle piece, they'll keep searching until they find or invent it. Almost overnight, speculation exploded online. Some accused Meghan of faking her pregnancy, suggesting she turned to a surrogate and concealed the truth with carefully worded statements and strict confidentiality agreements. Others argued there must have been a home birth or that Archie had been born earlier than disclosed. Many of these allegations were quickly dismissed as gossip without proof. Yet the confusion over the timeline, the lack of images, and the initial anonymity of the hospital all combined into fertile ground for rumors. In retrospect, it's clear how quickly the situation spiraled. Meghan and Harry were already locked in a tense standoff with the media. Harry especially made no secret of his contempt for the coverage he felt was invasive and at times hostile. Supporters of the couple insisted they were simply defending their right to privacy, especially in the face of prejudice that no previous royal had encountered. Their critics, however, interpreted every omission as evidence that something was being concealed. When the official documentation finally came out, it should have put the gossip to rest. The birth certificate laid out the details plainly: date, time, and place, till certain lines sparked new debate. Meghan was identified as Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, and her occupation was recorded as Princess of the United Kingdom. Some people regarded this as perfectly in line with royal convention. Diana's certificates had used similar wording. But in an environment already primed for suspicion, even routine labels were scrutinized. Was this a deliberate assertion of rank, a bureaucratic oversight, or something else entirely? Palace insisted it was standard practice. Detractors called it further proof that nothing about Archie's birth had been straightforward. From the outside, all of this might have seemed like petty quibbling. A baby was born, a family rejoiced. Why should it matter that a press release came a few hours late or that no hospital steps were involved? But for Meghan and Harry, nothing was ever just simple. In the vacuum created by their silence, theories multiplied. And the longer they refused to clarify why they'd done things differently, the more people invented their own explanations. The media played a pivotal role in magnifying the uncertainty. Some publications presented the Sussexes' choices as perfectly reasonable, a couple determined to have a moment of calm in an otherwise hectic life. Others leaned into more sensational angles, with headlines hinting that the couple owed the public a fuller account. Tabloid editors resurfaced old clips showing Meghan's baby bump appearing to shift shape as she moved or sat. Maybe it was an illusion created by loose fabrics. Maybe it was the camera. But to some, it was proof of an elaborate charade. Despite all the noise, no credible outlet ever unearthed evidence that Meghan's pregnancy had been fabricated. Respected fact-checking organizations examined every viral claim and found them groundless. Independent investigations confirmed the timeline and verified the documents. Yet, rumors don't need verification to flourish, they need only repetition. And in keeping with royal tradition, the palace chose to stay mostly silent, leaving the gossip to spread unchecked. This single episode became a lens through which deeper anxieties were projected. What does it mean to belong to the monarchy? Who gets to decide which traditions endure and which ones fade? For Harry, defending Meghan took precedence over preserving every royal ritual. For Meghan, controlling her narrative meant pushing back against an institution that prized predictability. In stepping outside the expected path, they opened the door to questions that have never quite disappeared. Years on, every time Meghan and Harry stepped back into the public eye, whether to release a documentary or publish an interview, old doubts resurfaced. The internet doesn't forget, and public memory is long. Videos were re-examined, timelines revisited, documents scrutinized again. And no matter how often the facts were confirmed, that nagging sense of unfinished business clung to the story. That's what makes this saga so enduring. When a story feels incomplete, no amount of explanation can erase the suspicion. Official statements pile up, corrections are issued, but the gap between certainty and doubt remains. In the tale of Archie's arrival, that space was never fully closed. As more records came to light, the couple's silence began to feel paradoxical. For those who supported them, it proved they had been pushed into defensive isolation by a press that refused to let them breathe. For their critics, it looked like a calculated strategy to keep uncomfortable truths out of sight. That's the irony. The quieter they were, the more every detail mattered. Had they chosen to follow Diana and Kate's example, to stand, exhausted but smiling before the cameras, the entire controversy might have evaporated. Those familiar photographs would have reassured everyone that tradition still held. Instead, by seeking privacy, Meghan and Harry created a riddle no amount of paperwork could solve. And so, in the space where clarity should have lived, speculation thrived. Each time a new piece of the Sussex story surfaced, another podcast, a lawsuit, a memoir, the same old questions re-emerged, trailing them like shadows. Perhaps that's the real consequence of leaving the narrative unfinished. It never stops inviting guesses. In the end, maybe the simplest explanation is the truest one. Perhaps the Sussexes were simply two parents trying to shield their baby from a world they knew could be brutal. Maybe the secrecy wasn't meant to deceive, but to protect. And maybe the real tragedy is how quickly that impulse was turned into a spectacle of its own. What's often overlooked is how the royal family's own approach to communication made everything more complicated. For generations, the monarchy has relied on carefully timed announcements and a strict sense of decorum to maintain public trust. Deviations from that formula rarely went unnoticed. When Charles and Diana's marriage began to unravel, the palace's reluctance to address the crisis only fueled public fascination. Decades later, the same pattern repeated itself. Except this time, social media amplified every whisper into a chorus. Some insiders claimed that even senior royal advisors were caught off guard by how Harry and Meghan managed Archie's arrival. They'd expected at least a nod to tradition. a brief appearance on the steps, or a short statement naming the hospital right away. Instead, the couple's insistence on privacy seemed almost defiant. To those within the institution, it felt like an implicit criticism of how things had always been done. That perception created tension that never fully resolved. In hindsight, it's clear that Meghan and Harry underestimated how eager the public was for reassurance. For millions of royal watchers, the rituals around a birth aren't mere spectacle. They're part of a shared heritage, a moment when an ancient institution feels tangible. Stripping away those customs left people grasping for something to hold on to, and when none was offered, they filled the void with suspicion. That's the strange contradiction. By protecting their own peace, the couple invited a level of scrutiny that might have been avoided if they'd simply played along. It was a reminder that in the monarchy, even small decisions can have consequences far beyond what anyone expects. As Archie grew, the speculation never fully faded. His christening, conducted privately with limited photographs, rekindled the same debates. Critics accused the Sussexes of manipulating public goodwill while denying the transparency expected of senior royals. Reporters argued that no parent should be forced to parade their newborn before the cameras. And so the battle lines were drawn once again. In many ways, this was the start of the larger story that would define Meghan and Harry's departure from royal life. Every disagreement about protocol and privacy eventually merged into a broader narrative about autonomy versus tradition. The questions around Archie's birth were only the first tremors of a much bigger rupture. Observers noted that even in their later interviews, the couple rarely spoke about the specifics of Archie's arrival. Instead, they focused on how they felt: unprotected, misunderstood, and isolated. Those emotions resonated with people who saw themselves in the Sussexes' struggles. But for those determined to find inconsistencies, the lack of concrete answers about the early days only deepened their doubts. And that's the power of a story that feels unfinished. Creates a kind of negative space, a vacuum that pulls in every rumor and half-truth. Over time, it stops mattering whether the doubts are grounded in reality. They become part of the folklore. Royal historians have pointed out that the same dynamic played out with other royal controversies: abdications, affairs, quiet separations. But there's something unique about the way Meghan and Harry's story unfolded. The immediacy of social media meant that speculation didn't just simmer in tabloids, it erupted globally in real time. The episode also revealed how quickly public goodwill can evaporate. When Meghan and Harry first introduced Archie, there was genuine joy. Headlines celebrated the arrival of a healthy baby boy. But within weeks, that joy curdled into frustration. People felt shut out. They wondered why the Sussexes seemed unwilling to share the same rituals everyone else had accepted as part of the royal bargain. In their efforts to guard their private lives, the couple underestimated how personally some people took that choice. For lifelong royal followers, being excluded from the familiar rituals felt like a rejection. And in that emotional gap, conspiracy theories found fertile soil. Even years later, those who study media dynamics point to Archie's birth as a case study in how modern information ecosystems can distort perception. Every vague phrase, every unconfirmed detail became a building block for narratives that refused to die. Perhaps the most striking thing is how little any of these questions ultimately mattered to the monarchy's day-to-day functioning. Archie's place in the line of succession remains intact. No constitutional crisis erupted, but the sense of uncertainty never really went away, and that, more than any single rumor, shaped the Sussexes' legacy. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder whether more openness in those early days might have changed everything. A single photograph on the hospital steps, a clear statement naming the medical team, even the smallest nod to tradition could have reassured those who were inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. But that wasn't their path. Meghan and Harry had already decided they would not be bound by precedent. They believed their way, quiet, private, controlled, was better, and maybe for them it was. But in the ecosystem of royal coverage, their silence was never going to be enough. Every few months, the conversation reignites. A new documentary, a fresh interview, another round of speculation. And each time, the questions about Archie's birth resurface, echoing across headlines and hashtags as if no time has passed at all. That's the irony of trying to control a narrative in the digital age. The harder you grip it, the more it slips away. For Meghan and Harry, the desire to protect their family became the very thing that made their story feel incomplete. And in the end, maybe that's the lesson. When you step away from centuries of tradition, you have to be ready for the fallout. 'Cause in the monarchy, every choice is magnified. Every omission is an opportunity for doubt. Even now, as Archie grows older, the conversation continues. Not because there's any real mystery left to uncover, but because the birth became a symbol of change, of resistance, of the limits of privacy in a world that demands constant transparency. Some watchers believe that, in time, all of this will fade into little more than a footnote, a curiosity from the early days of Harry and Meghan's independent chapter. But others suspect it will always linger in the background, a reminder that even the smallest break with protocol can carry consequences that last for years. Every time the Sussexes assert their version of events, there's a chorus ready to question whether the whole truth has ever been told. In a way, the saga of Archie's birth stands as a mirror reflecting the deeper divides in how people view the monarchy itself. To some, tradition is a comforting constant, a way to ensure continuity when everything else feels uncertain. To others, it's a relic that stifles growth and punishes those who try to chart their own course. Meghan and Harry became the perfect lightning rods for that debate, their personal choices magnified until they took on national, even global significance. It's also a testament to how storytelling has changed. Decades ago, the royal family could release a statement and trust that most people would accept it at face value. Now every word is examined, every omission interpreted. A single inconsistency can be enough to fuel months of speculation, no matter how many official documents are produced to clarify what happened. Maybe in the end, this is what modern royalty looks like. An endless tug-of-war between privacy and performance, authenticity and skepticism. Meghan and Harry's journey shows just how difficult it is to balance those forces without losing control of the narrative altogether. And it proves that once a question has been asked loudly enough, no amount of reassurance will ever fully make it go away. Because sometimes a story isn't just about what actually happened, it's about what people choose to believe, and how fiercely they hold on to those beliefs, even when the evidence tells another tale.